team. Welcome to episode 117 of Transition Talk, where we talk about dental transitions and how to navigate the sometimes messy path to practice ownership. Everyone has their own unique journey to practice ownership. Perhaps you're a recent graduate, excited to have dental school in the past, and you just want to work and get in the routine of things. Maybe ownership is on your mind, but you want to focus on building that experience first. Or maybe you've been working in a practice for a few years and you want to start making the push towards ownership because you now believe you can do it. Regardless of where you are in your career, we'll discuss some key considerations and action items to work on in preparation for practice ownership. Hello, Mr. Loretto.
Miss Radcliffe, what a wonderful day we're having.
I know. It's like fall in Texas.
The sun feels good. The weather is good. Just roll down your window. Let the hair kind of just run around.
I know. We'll enjoy it for 0.5 seconds that we get it.
I know. Fall. It's school time.
School time. It's birthday month in the Ratcliffe house.
What's happening over there?
Well, we made the big leap. We finally gave Lila a cell phone. She has not had a cell phone. I made it to 14 in 8th grade. I feel very proud of myself. She's the last person, like literally every friend she has one.
Was she yelling and screaming and knocking the doors and being like a normal teenager, like, give me the freaking phone?
That is not her. It has never been her. She is my kid who took like 5 months to give me like an inkling of a smile. She's my kid who like, she's excited on the inside, but like she's going to not show it on the outside, you know? So I've kind of like lowered my expectations on gift giving. She will be excited. And now after like a long time,
Sure.
I can see it in her eyes, you know, and I can see her like little, you know, but she's not going to do the whole like, and like crazy and crying, and that's never going to be her. So one day I say I'll do it.
Would be inappropriate because Cole is 24, but for them to have a play date, it'd be very interesting because, that just sounds like my son. I don't know that I've ever seen him just jump up for glory like this is the greatest thing, ever. So I had the fall drop off with Cole down at UT Tyler, and, got him new furniture, this and that, and like, thanks, Dad. It's just like, give me some emotion. Give me a little just excitement. This is the greatest thing ever. And
I know. Bryn is that person for me. Bryn's the person I get the picture on Christmas morning of her like midair jumping, you know, so excited. I'm just like, okay, like, and she's been like that since she was born. She like smiled like within a month. I mean, it's just so funny that your kids are like who they are. Yeah,
it's nice just because you set expectations so it doesn't upset you anymore.
No.
Right? No, it's just,
like,
it is what it is. You know what you're going to get from that. And if you get a little excitement out of them, like a little half smile, like,
win.
I think he smiled.
I'm so proud of myself.
He called me on my birthday and sang happy birthday to me. He did it. He offered on my birthday he said, Dad, you want me to sing you happy birthday? And I said, son, I'm elated you called, because it doesn't call me. I'm elated you called and even thinking of me on my birthday, so you don't have to sing.
No.
This is enough.
But while we're at it.
Yeah?
1, 2, 3. No.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm excited. I know I say that every episode, but I am excited about this episode. I really am.
No, I think it's good. I mean, we haven't really talked about this topic in a while. I don't know the number. I should have looked that up before. We're going to talk all about the associate today and kind of some tips to get you, if you're an associate and don't own, but you have a desire to own, like how do you get there? And then like some kind of more logistical pieces about the associate agreement and non-competes and some things that we kind of look out for. So lots to cover today, a lot that you cover in your lectures and that we cover when we talk to dental students, but that you even cover when you're, at Hinman and kind of talking to kind of those that have been out of school for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. We've worked with associates who have been in the world for 10 to 15 years and are just looking to own. So there's a lot of ways we can go about this. Some are things you can like actively do outside of your practice that you're working in and outside of the clinical world. And there's some things that like you have to kind of be ready clinically. One of the things we always tell people is like your first job out of school is you just need to go somewhere and be busy.
Yes. I think this episode today is about, kind of ties into that why message, like why to become an owner and kind of what are those critical paths. There's so many people that will just say, well, what do you think I should do? What's my critical path? So this is literally the associate's path episode. This is kind of your critical path. And so, I always talk about the 6 reasons you own, get out of school, get some experience, get some cash, understand tax, pension, and then ultimately kind of pay yourself and pay down your debts. But this is about getting you clinical speed ups. I mean, absolutely critical. This was a lecture that I put together at Hinman last year, and it kind of was this aha moment. And they asked me to come up with a lecture that talked about being a 3-day owner. And so I started working with the math and started figuring out like, okay, so what amount of production would I need to do in a private practice to where I only had to work 3 days a week? And in the end, you started backing into, well, what amount would I need to produce on a per day basis to achieve that? So then I started running numbers if you were doing 5,000 a day, 6,000 a day, 7,000 a day, 8,000 a day, only working a 12-day month or a 3-day work week. And then I wanted to see just, was that possible? Okay. So then you go to your more established doctors that are doing $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 days and doing well over $100,000 a month in 3-day work weeks. And what I found that was so interesting is their push on the clinical side from a training. So these guys, these gals have done extensive CE, extensive hands-on courses with SPEAR, with COIS, with the Pankey Institute. They have gone through the curriculum. And that to me was just fascinating because now all of a sudden I could really, really see it. And since that lecture, we've been able to build a relationship with Spear to really understand what courses they offer. And so that we can use and leverage them with building relationship with these students and residents and people with maybe less than 5 years experience so they can achieve these clinical goals. And so once you get those clinical goals, everything starts to work, right? So if you can get numbers to where you're doing $7,000 days on the clinical side and you're only working 12 days, that's $84,000 on the restorative side. Plus you're probably now, having at least $30,000 to $40,000 a month in hygiene. Now all of a sudden you're running $1 million, $2 million, $3 practice 3 days a week. I know what the overhead would look like in that scenario. And now all of a sudden we're making $500,000 to $600,000 a year as a general dentist working as something as simple as 3 days a week. Now you have the ability to bring associate. Now you have the ability to maybe pull equity out in the transition. So all these light bulbs are just like, oh my gosh, the critical path for these young people is you just have to go back and reinvest yourself and not just taking an online course or hearing this guy or gal speak or reading this or that. I mean, you got to physically be at these large major clinical institutes to where you're working directly with patients and directly with teams of people that you can get your speed up. So, man, I've never been more passionate about pushing clinical in my life. Done this 20 years. It's like clinical. That's your path. And they're just looking at me like, I thought this is going to be a business lecture. It is. Get your speed up.
Well, and I think too, like choosing where you go to practice post graduation. We've always been proponents of ownership, but we've also always been proponents of having to go somewhere and just work. And I think sometimes it's saying, hey, this is not ultimately maybe the type of practice or where I want to go long term, but this is where I need to go to be able to like hone those clinical skills and see practices that are more fast paced. And you can mix that in with maybe a private practice that's a little more boutique in nature because that's where you want to go. So you need to see that, but like making sure you're kind of giving yourself that varied experience and the ability to do that production and kind of gain that speed and gain that perspective, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think as if you're a student and you're thinking about a GPR HD program, my challenge to you would be to look at those programs. And I'd want to know exactly the number of extractions, the exact number of implants that average residents are placing. I'd want to see IV sedation courses. I'd want to see exactly what the curriculum has and expectations there. If I'm interviewing a DSO that I'm going to work at, I'd want to know which location, not maybe the location that you interviewed with, but which location would you be working with? Is it already established patient base? How productive is the dentist or dentist in that practice? Are you replacing somebody? If it's a private practice and he or she's gone through all of these courses with Pankey, Spear, whoever, but now you can see that they're doing $100,000 a month. I want to work in that relationship. I want to work and be mentored by somebody like that and to go, how did you do that? I want to be as fast as you. I want to be as good as you. So I think that if it's from a student standpoint, looking at GPR, or if it's a corporate office or even a private practice, to be able to look and to see the environment. And if it's a slow environment, perhaps that's fine, but you now need to know that you've got to go and take some of those outside courses from the best of the best to get your speed up.
Yeah. And I think this goes along with kind of another point that's really important is from a liquidity standpoint. So clearly the more you can do, the kind of more cash flow and kind of compensation you're probably making. Liquidity is clearly a very important component of purchasing a practice and kind of owning. It's also a challenging time to do it because I always feel like people graduate and they get married and have a baby and buy their first house and they've been kind of scrimping for so long. So what's your thoughts on liquidity and kind of saving and what that needs to look like?
Yeah, so those first 1 to 2 years years as you either finish a residency program or finishing your 4th-year program, just, getting that clinical speed up. So again, you can make more money because typically you'll be in some type of incentive. 30% of what you do, 30% of nothing's nothing, and 30% of 100,000 a month is 30 grand. So let's go back to step one, get the speed up. Now that you make the money, then let's balance out the savings part, because we will need liquidity to buy a practice. When you will go to banks and they're going to ask you a series of questions from the practice you're purchasing to your experience, revolving debt, et cetera. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions. And in the end, you need liquidity. And so the simple math is that if it's $1 million practice that you're purchasing, and that practice purchase price is $800,000 or 80% of collections, then you're going to need roughly about 6 to 7% of that purchase price. So roughly $50,000, $55,000 is what you'll need to have saved. So my general rule is to come out, get the experience, and try to get somewhere between $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. If you've got more than that, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, 200,000, what that's going to do is allow us to A, buy a bigger practice, and B, it'll also allow us to maybe not just purchase the practice, but potentially purchase the real estate as well if that's part of the transaction. So liquidity is huge. I think just kind of talking out loud, we work with obviously several really good lenders. I think an episode that we should have is just let's interview, maybe get like a dual, I don't know, let's get at least 2 bankers and let's ask them these questions, right? Because we were not the experts. We do know what we're talking about because we know when they get declined and we know when to make the introduction. So, because I think there's other subjects that need to be discussed. A revolving debt could be their credit card. Let's don't go out and buy new cars at this point. Let's try not to purchase, the $1 million home as the associate. Let's really try to be conservative and make ourselves look really, really good from a banking and lending perspective.
Yeah. And I think, just as you've listened to this podcast at all, you know that every transition is unique. And so while there are definitely some guardrails that I think lenders have as far as how much you have to have saved and credit score and all these various pieces, I think there's also times when maybe some of those things are moved because of the cash flows of the practice and the unique nature about maybe what you're buying and who you are and what your speed is and what your abilities are. And so there are also times when life happens and you have to buy the house or use some of your liquidity. And so what does that look like? And so I think the more educated you can be earlier. So if you are not thinking about buying, anytime in the near future, you can still start taking some action to set yourself up for being successful from a debt and from a financial standpoint. I did not know this until, I don't know, some point in time I learned it, but if you have a loan for a car and it's, $900 a month, it does not matter if you have 1 month left or 12 months left when you go through underwriting. Right. They're going to assume you're going to have that $900 payment forever, right? So if you buy a new car as soon as you get out of dental school and think that you're going to have it paid off, right? And then something comes up in the middle, you're going to be penalized that you have that extra big expense. And so just kind of being thoughtful about that and kind of having conversations and listening to podcasts like this so that financially you're making decisions today and tomorrow that aren't going to hinder you from when you're ready from actually buying, which is what we see often, which is always a little bit of heartbreaking.
And we'd love that for you to start talking to lenders early on in this process. It could be, I would say 6 to 12 months before ownership, I think is a very appropriate time because the lending game, it constantly is changing. I can tell you at the time of this recording, you've got rates that are at 5% right now on 10-year amortizations. Mm-hmm. And it was just 6, 8, 10, 12 months ago that the competitive rates were in the 6, 6.5, and 7. Mm-hmm. So they're already kind of pricing in some of the potential drops that we're going to have, with interest rates coming up, later this fall. So I don't know. It's interesting to see how banks can sometimes be more aggressive and sometimes be super conservative on their lending, as a whole, regardless if they're billion-dollar companies. So just staying in touch with them and kind of know exactly so you can budget for getting the loan.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So clinically prepared, financially prepared, making sure we're kind of just managing those two things and continuing to kind of build liquidity and build speed. Another thing that I think is underappreciated, I think, is networking and creating networks and socializing. If you're looking to buy 100% practice, you may not find the person on Facebook, Snapchat,
Right.
like LinkedIn, whatever, the social media network of the month is, but building like real relationships and going to these meetings, at the Spear or, your annual meeting, your state meeting, your local meetings, and really like getting connected with the community, right?
For sure.
That's how people find the practices that are the best. You know what I mean? And like especially if they have a specific geographic area that they're hoping to stay in.
No, I think that's great. I was just Texas A&M, Pedo. I invited them to dinner and gave a presentation, and a lot of the feedback from the residents. This Dallas market is saturated. I'm like, really? You think it's saturated? I said, here's a question. So you have people that are coming through on rotation and giving kind of their time and teaching you about private practice, and you're actually going to these offices, correct? I was like, yeah. I was like, are they slow? Are they busy? Oh, they're busy. Like line out the door? Yeah. I said, there's a demand. Mm-hmm. So just because you're seeing, all of these locations and thinking, hey, it's just busy and saturated, it's not the reality. The reality is there's a high demand. And the reality is you need a network. And if I'm in your shoes, I would join the Southwest Society of Pedo, and I would know every single one of them. Every single one of these people that are coming through on rotation or going out, I would literally email and text you a phone number for all of them and say, I'm looking for a private practice. I want this part of the DFW, this part of this. Do you know somebody in Colorado? If it's a GP and you're going out to to Spear, whatever, I want to know every person that's coming through that from a teaching standpoint. Everybody in that class, I want email and I want this. I want to be able to get in that network of 11,000 people and figure out who in Southwest Colorado has gone through the same training that perhaps is looking for somebody like me. It could be selling the practice or it could be an associate that leads to an ownership. The mail campaign, getting that mail campaign out via the letters that we talk about on the blog and mailing out the CV and the cover letter so that we can get interest. It's just, I get a little passionate, upset. I don't know what the word is when people come to me and they just like, well, I really don't have an opportunity. It's because you haven't put any effort into it. You put all your effort in your clinical training and all your effort in here at school. It doesn't stop
put
there.
Yourself out there.
You've got to keep working. You've got to keep driving. And so until you own that business, until you're wildly successful, it is not time to let your foot off. And the best way to do that is networking and marketing so that you can have 6, 7, 8 different opportunities to evaluate all of those and then ultimately decide, hey, I think this is the one, definitely stands out above the other 5, 6, or 7 that I've looked at.
We had a candidate. I don't think they listened to the podcast, and you'll know why in a second, but they had a candidate that was looking into one of our practices, and we said, can we have your CV? Because, that's just what you do.
Sure.
They were like, never been asked that. I don't have one. Do you think I need one? And I said, why don't you go read this blog article and listen to this podcast episode? And yes, you need to market yourself. Like, who else is going to market you, right? Like, there's a lot of you, and, you're going to want to find the best job, and you're going to want to present to any employer or any owner. You want to sell yourself, And so that, to me, you have to be proactive in that regard and make real human contact, because those are the people who are going to think about you when their friend, you've never met, right? That person's going to be like, you know what? I've had a really sharp endodontist last year and they were looking. I don't know, that maybe they're still looking. Let me look for their information in my email. Here you go.
They were obviously not one of my students at Texas Tech University because that's one of my requirements that they must submit that for me to review because it's critical to their path.
Important.
It's critical to their path.
So let's say you are graduating soon, you're changing jobs, you are clearly probably going to have to sign an associate contract.
Yes.
In order to work at whatever practice you're working at. Clearly, highly recommend an attorney look at that, even if you don't think it's necessary and think it looks great, spend the money. It's going to be worth it. What are your thoughts on associate contracts? Kind of what is our role kind of for if you haven't listened and you don't know what we do with those or why they're important to us? What does that look like?
The first thing is the why. Like, why are you going to work this place? And so I really want to be sold there. And let's say it's a corporate office. Perfect. Then tell me it's busy. Tell me location-wise, experience of the doctors, right? So it checks all those. Then from there, I'd want to see, is there some type of sign-on bonus? And then what is your penalty for leaving? Just be careful if there is some type of sign-on bonus and it's a 1 or 2 year, maybe 2 year contract. pretty common for 2 year, that if you do leave within that 2 year period, you will have to pay that back. So just be aware of that. So I want to know your why. Yes, it's busy. Then I want to look at what type of perhaps maybe non-compete that's there, what's enforceable. So that's, to me, is always like some of my first early questions. If it's in a private practice, an associate, what is it going to lead to? Is this going to lead to, is it a one doctor owner and he's got 5 associates? Okay, that's kind of like a corporate office. You're probably not going to lead to anything, but is it a one doctor practice where you're going to associate for a year, then buy the doctor outright? Now I'm asking different questions. I'm not as focused on, are you going to get 30 or 32%? Not focused on, how the lab compensation or expense is going to work back for you. I'm more focused on, why are we there? What are we buying?
Yep.
So I'm willing to work for less as long as it's going to lead to something that fits my long-term goals. In this case, what this podcast is about ownership. So I'm happy to look at those. We're happy to look at some of these associate contracts. But again, purpose of this podcast is basically we're going to ask some big questions about why are we going there.
Yeah. And there's some things that I think you just need to look at and say, don't read an agreement and then be like, oh, but that'll probably never happen. Right? I mean, I think that you have to do your front end work of making sure if it says termination, right? Some agreements we read, the employer has every right to terminate you or terminate you without notice, but you have none of the same rights, right? Maybe you're okay with that, but maybe you want the ability to terminate if you find something else or it's not your long-term fit or whatever that looks like, right? It's just understanding that a legal document has teeth, right? And that you're signing something and you're committing to those terms and being able to say, I had someone look this over. They educated me on what I'm signing and why. And now I know. And hopefully I don't have to look at this agreement again. But if I do, great. I feel better. And I think the non-compete thing, we had Ali on earlier this month, I think.
Yeah.
At least from this recording. And we talked about the new non-compete regulations that are kind of coming down the pipe. They were supposed to come into effect on the 4th of September, but a Texas federal judge actually put a stop. And now it's going to go to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court picks it up. So it's a little bit in limbo, but I think the general consensus is this is probably something at some point in time in the future that's probably going to happen. And what does that mean for associates, right? I'm sure the associates, I think he even said, had a whole group of associates and potential buyers that were so excited and ready for this to go away. And a whole group of sellers that were oh gosh, what
Right.
happens and how do I protect? And what does this look like? And keep in mind, this is just not for dentistry, right? This expands beyond, employees at Google, employees of any firm, right? Depending on what side of the fence you're on, you're probably cheering or sneering, but I think it's something to think about. And I think we think what if this is a catalyst that causes people to talk more about what it means to bring on an associate and is it the right person and what plan do I have? Wouldn't that be amazing instead of just relying on the non-compete language?
Oh, I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. Is it will create a much bigger dialogue between the two people, between the seller and the buyer. It's let's just talk. Let's be open and candid about what our plans are, from how I'm going to be the associate to what point is a partnership going to happen. And the reason it's important to me is because just time. You're wasting so much time, and I think that you're in the driver's seat to have good conversations about what is the path for you, the associate, at that point before you're hired. Once you're hired, it becomes much more difficult to have really sit down meetings about what the future looks like. But you kind of have a little bit more flexibility and drive and any negotiating skills before than after. So I agree. There's still this non-compete up in the air as far as what actually is going to have all the teeth here and what's going to hold. But in the end, before signing these associate agreements, I think the biggest thing is let's force ourselves to really think of our why and force ourselves to really have some really good conversations with the seller, with the employer, knowing that, look, if you're going to go work for a big corporation, probably not going to negotiate much on this. They're probably not going to have, their corporate attorneys, 1,000 employees redo their agreement for you. It's probably going to be a kind of an as is, probably more flexibility in some of these smaller private practices where the lawyer created something, can tweak something here or there. So again, good conversations just to be thinking about. I think for this episode, just on the path, this is a short path that you're on, 1 or 2 years of just getting that experience, getting that cash, building that relationship with practices, figure out the one you're going to purchase, and then understand the liquidity, the importance of that, surrounding yourself with a good transition team, help you understand exactly what you're going to buy, get yourself into this ownership thing. Let's make a bunch of money. Let's tax plan. Let's pension plan. Let's build wealth. I spoke to the Utah Orthodontic Association this past Friday, and the guy was at the very end, it was the last question. I was All right, well, give me more questions. He's like, what's the biggest mistake that you've seen associates make? And it was literally what I just told you. Okay. It's trying to pay off their student debt, working 5 to 6 years, not having the liquidity to buy a practice. It's not building relationships and networks of people and practices. It's not understanding things that they sign. They're an associate for a long period of time. They can't get over the hump of ownership. And just the time has elapsed. To me, it makes me sad sometimes. And it gives me hope too that if we can inspire somebody to be able to take some of this education that we try to deliver here and to get them to think differently and perhaps put them on a different course that could really put them on a different path, a different future. It's super cool, super fun.
I mean, I feel like you're getting better at these wrap-ups. I mean, like, is there anything left to say? There's not.
I was trying to show off there, Christy.
So, all right, team. That's all we have for today. I mean, that pen drop. Thanks for joining us on episode 117 of Transition Talk. As always, make sure to share the transition love with those who may not know of us yet. And of course, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time.
See you guys.